Cork, Ireland. January 10th, 2016, rain on dark roads. A car loses control on the N25. Colin Vearncombe, black, lies unconscious in the wreckage. No drama, no exit line, only silence reclaiming the man who spent his life learning to speak through it. For 16 days, he remains in coma. Hospital machines breathe for him while across the world, people who never met him play his music on repeat, as if volume could tether him to life. On January 26, 2016, the machines stop. Colin Vearncombe slips away with the same quietness that defined his art. No spectacle, no stage, just the final exhale of a man who always preferred whispers to shouts. The news spreads softly, appropriately. The man who gave the world its anthem for beautiful sadness is gone. Wonderful Life, that song about surviving despair with grace, becomes a eulogy sung by millions who suddenly understand what they've lost. Not just an artist, but a proof that gentleness could matter in a world built on noise. Was this really an accident? Or was there something inevitable about a life lived so delicately ending on impact? Could someone who felt everything so deeply have survived much longer in a world determined to be loud? What if Colin Vearncombe's tragedy wasn't the car crash, but that he was always too sensitive for the century he was born into? At his funeral, they play the song. The church falls silent except for his voice, recorded decades earlier, preserved in the amber of vinyl and digital, singing about going out to sea again. Everyone weeps. Not because he's gone, but because his absence confirms what the music always suggested. That beauty and sadness are inseparable, that some souls are too pure for sustained existence, that the softest voices often speak the truest words. But to understand how a boy from Liverpool became the poet laureate of quiet desperation, and why that desperation was always tinged with acceptance rather than rage, we must return to the beginning. To a city haunted by the ghost of the Beatles, where a sensitive child learned that music could transform loneliness into something almost like company. Liverpool, 1962. The city still vibrates with the recent explosion of the Beatles, but Colin Vearncombe arrives into a different Liverpool, the one after the fireworks, when ordinary people return to ordinary lives and wonder what it means to be from a place famous for escape. Born May 26th, he grows up in a working-class household where dreams are luxuries and music is background, not vocation. But Colin is attuned to frequencies others miss. Where his classmates hear songs, he hears emotions without names. Where others see gray Liverpool skies, he sees 50 shades of melancholy, each with its own texture and weight. He's not sad, exactly. More accurately, he's aware. Aware that joy is temporary, that beauty hurts, that existence itself is a bittersweet proposition requiring constant negotiation. He discovers Leonard Cohen at 14. Too young for Cohen, really, but perfect timing for Colin. The Canadian poet-singer's baritone meditations on love and loss give Colin permission. Sadness can be art. Darkness can be beautiful. You don't have to pretend life is wonderful to make wonderful things from it. Later come David Bowie, Scott Walker, the great British melancholics who understood that pop music could carry philosophy. Colin learns guitar not to impress, but to communicate what words alone cannot. His voice develops, a baritone that sounds like smoke and rain, like someone whispering confessions at 3 a.m., like the friend who tells you it's okay to not be okay. He starts writing songs in his bedroom, private hymns to loneliness and longing, never imagining anyone else will hear them. At 16, he forms his first band. They play local venues to sparse crowds of people more interested in drinking than listening. But Colin doesn't mind. He's not performing. He's existing aloud, testing whether his internal weather matches anyone else's. The answer, he discovers, is yes. There are others who feel too much, who find sunshine oppressive and rain comforting, who understand that wonderful life is not an exclamation but a question. Could these early years, the gray city, the awareness of sadness as a valid state, the discovery that beauty and sorrow are twins, have been preparing him for the one song that would define him? Could the boy who trusted sadness more than happiness have known he was building a cathedral of feeling that millions would eventually seek shelter in? At 17, Colin makes a decision that will define everything. He chooses a stage name, not to create distance between self and performance, but to create focus. Black. One word, absolute, not darkness for its own sake, but darkness as contrast, as canvas, as the color that makes all other colors visible. Black as minimalism, black as honesty, black as the space where sound becomes meaningful. It's a punk move disguised as poetry, stripping away everything unnecessary until only essence remains. Colin Vearncombe becomes black, and in becoming black he gives himself permission to be exactly what he is. Quiet in a loud era, gentle in an aggressive scene, hopeful about sadness in a culture that demands happiness. The question isn't whether he'll make it. The question is whether the world is ready for someone like him. Flash. London Studio, 1982. Colin sits alone with a 4-track recorder. Outside, the city roars. Inside, he whispers his truth onto magnetic tape. The early 1980s are unkind to sensitive souls. Britain is in the grip of Thatcherism, all sharp elbows and sharper ambitions. Pop music is synthesizers and shoulder pads, new romantic excess and aggressive optimism. In studios thick with synth and calculated joy, Colin Vearncombe leaves space for air. Silence is his collaborator. Into this landscape of more, he offers less. Sparse arrangements, quiet vocals, songs that don't demand attention but reward it. His first releases under the name Black go nowhere commercially. Record labels don't know what to do with him. Too melancholy for pop radio, too melodic for the alternative stations, too British for America, too quiet for everyone. He records in small studios, releases on tiny independent labels, plays shows to audiences of dozens. The music industry's message is clear. We don't need another sad boy with a guitar, but Colin persists with the patience of someone who understands that truth doesn't require validation. He works day jobs, anything that pays for studio time and leaves mental energy for writing. At night, he crafts songs with the precision of a watchmaker, each chord chosen for emotional resonance, each lyric tested against the standard of absolute honesty. He's not trying to be commercially successful. He's trying to be true. In 1985, something shifts. WEA Records, a major label, takes interest. Not because they understand Black, but because they sense something. A quality they can't name but recognize as potentially valuable. They offer a deal. Colin, pragmatic despite his romantic soul, signs. He knows major labels have resources independent labels don't. He doesn't know yet what major labels demand in return. The compromise begins immediately. The label wants hits. Colin wants truth. The label wants radio-friendly production. Colin wants space and silence. They meet in the middle, which means both sides are slightly uncomfortable. Always the sign of either great art or terrible mistakes. Flash, Studio, 1986. Colin sits with his guitar, alone. Outside, the city demands happiness. Inside, he writes his truth. In 1986, he records the song that will change everything. It emerges from a day of absolute despair. One of those days when existence feels like too much weight, when even breathing requires conscious effort. Colin sits with his guitar and writes a song about that feeling. Not wallowing in it, but observing it with the detached curiosity of someone who has learned that emotions are weather. They come, they pass, but you remain. The song is about looking at life's beauty while feeling incapable of accessing that beauty emotionally. It's about the gap between knowing you should feel grateful and actually feeling grateful. It's about survival not as triumph, but as continuation. He calls it Wonderful Life, and the title is not ironic but complex, a recognition that life can be objectively wonderful while subjectively unbearable, and both things can be true simultaneously. For the first time, he considered whether commercial success was possible. It was, but not without cost. The label releases Wonderful Life in 1987, and slowly, because truth moves slower than hype, it begins to connect. First in Britain, then across Europe. The song doesn't storm the charts, it seeps into them, accumulating listeners the way tide accumulates water. People hear it and feel seen, not happy but seen. The song doesn't promise that everything will be okay. It promises that feeling not okay is okay, and that's a more valuable promise. The music video is shot in black and white in Southport, Merseyside. Colin walks alone across a bridge, along a beach, through empty streets. No dancers, no special effects. Just a man existing in space, and somehow that simplicity is more powerful than any spectacle. His face in close-up, gentle, knowing, sad but not broken, becomes the face of an entire generation's quiet struggles. Wonderful Life reaches the top 10 across Europe. Black is suddenly everywhere: TV shows, radio interviews, magazine covers. Colin Vearncombe, who wanted to whisper, is being asked to shout. The shy man who wrote songs to process his own emotions is now expected to be a pop star, with all the performance and pretense that entails. This is the paradox that will define his career. The very authenticity that made Wonderful Life resonate is incompatible with the fame that authenticity created. Colin cannot be black and be a celebrity. He can only be black or be a celebrity. The industry demands both. Colin knows he can only offer one, and the pressure mounts quickly. Record label executives want repeatability, more songs like Wonderful Life, not understanding that the song was successful because it was true, and truth cannot be manufactured on demand. Colin tries. He releases Sweetest Smile, Everything's Coming Up Roses, the album comedy, in 1988. All are beautiful. None achieve what the label hoped. The unspoken question grows louder. Why can't he simply give them what they want? Behind all that acclaim, was there an unbearable pressure that nobody saw? Or was the pressure visible to everyone, hiding in plain sight in the very songs that made him famous? Songs about the weight of existence, about the exhaustion of feeling, about survival as its own achievement. By 1990, the relationship with WEA is fracturing. They want a product. He wants to make art. They want predictability. He wants to explore. The compromise is killing both the music and the man making it. Colin makes a decision that will define the second half of his career. He leaves. Walking away from a major label at the height of your fame is commercial suicide. Everyone tells him this. His manager, his bandmates, his friends in the industry. Stay, compromise a little more, secure your future. But Colin has learned that some securities are prisons. He'd rather risk obscurity than guarantee inauthenticity. Did this decision mark his commercial downfall? Or was it the most artistically courageous choice he could make? Can you outrun the machine when the machine has already decided what you are? The 1991 album Black is Colin's declaration of independence. Self-produced, self-funded, self-determined. It's the album he always wanted to make. Sparse, atmospheric, emotionally complex. No concessions to radio formats or commercial expectations, just songs that sound like 3 a.m. conversations with yourself, like fog rolling off the Irish Sea, like the acceptance that comes after fighting too long. Critics love it. Tracy Thorn from Everything But the Girl calls it a masterpiece of restraint. Brian Eno praises how it makes sound breathe. David Sylvian, the Japanese minimalist Colin has always admired, sends a note. This is what I've been trying to do for years. The public is less certain. Black doesn't chart. Radio doesn't play it. The songs are too quiet, too slow, too sad for an era embracing grunge and rave culture. Colin watches his commercial viability evaporate and feels, not devastated, but liberated. "I finally made the album I wanted," he tells a journalist. "Nobody bought it. Perfect symmetry." Cut, Ireland, 1994. Morning light on the Irish Sea. Colin walks the shore, camera in hand. The world has moved on. He has arrived. This begins the long middle period of Colin Vearncombe's career. The years of obscurity that are also the years of peace. He moves to Ireland, first Cork, then eventually a small coastal village where neighbors know him as the quiet English guy who walks on the beach every morning, not as Black the one-hit wonder. He sets up a small home studio. He paints watercolors of clouds and waves. He photographs the Irish landscape on film cameras, developing prints in his bathroom-turned-dark room. He continues making music, but on his terms. Independent albums every few years released on small labels or self-released. Tours of small venues for audiences who know all the album tracks, not just the hit. These shows are intimate. Colin often stops between songs to chat, to tell the stories behind the music, to create the feeling of being at a friend's house rather than a concert. This is the career he always wanted. Sustainable, honest, small enough to remain human. People sometimes ask if he regrets leaving the major label, if he wishes he'd compromised just enough to stay commercially relevant. His answer is always the same. "I wasn't chasing fame. I was chasing peace and sound." And he found it here in Ireland, making music for the dozens or hundreds who still care rather than millions who maybe never really understood. Can anyone ever truly escape the shadow of their biggest success? Or was Colin's entire post-fame career a dialogue with wonderful life, proving that one true song matters more than a career of compromises? The years in Ireland transformed Colin from pop star into craftsman. He embraces the term, "I'm not an artist, I'm a craftsman of feeling." He approaches songwriting like carpentry, with attention to detail and respect for materials. Each album is a small, perfect thing, not rushed, not overstuffed, not trying to be more than it is. He releases Water on Stone, 2007, Between Two Worlds, 2009, Blind Faith, 2013. Albums most people never hear, but those who do treasure deeply. The production is pristine. Colin has learned every aspect of recording, can shape sound with the precision of a sculptor. But the heart remains the same. Songs about loneliness that make you feel less alone. Songs about sadness that make sadness feel holy. Songs about survival that don't promise salvation but offer companionship. His wife, Camilla, becomes his partner in all senses. Managing the small business of being Black, running the website, handling the practical details that allow Colin to focus on the work. They live simply. Colin has no interest in accumulation. His pleasures are modest. Good coffee, good books, walks on empty beaches, the quality of light at different times of day. In 2014, he releases Water on Stone, a reworked version of earlier material, his most mature work. The songs are sparse even by his standards, often just voice and piano or guitar with space measured in seconds of silence. "Some people shout to be heard," he writes in the liner notes. "I whisper to be remembered." Those who know him speak of his gentleness with consistent amazement. Tracy Thorn. "He was the softest soul I ever met. Not weak, soft. There's a difference. Softness requires strength in this world." Music journalists who interview him leave charmed by his courtesy, his self-deprecating humor, his complete lack of ego about his place in music history. He speaks of wonderful life as if it happened to someone else, which in a sense it did. The 25-year-old who wrote it barely resembles the 50-year-old discussing it. In his journal dated 1994, "If fame is a storm, I'd rather be the rain after it." By any conventional measure, Colin Vearncombe's career is a disappointment. One massive hit followed by decades of diminishing commercial returns. But by his own measure, it's a success. He made exactly the music he wanted, lived exactly the life he chose, and hurt no one in the process. He tours occasionally, always small venues. In 2015, he plays a series of shows across Ireland and the UK. Audiences are mixed ages. Some who remember 1987, others who discovered him through their parents' record collections, a few who found him through YouTube recommendations. The shows are tender. Colin's voice, now weathered but still gentle, wraps around the songs like fog. At a gig in Dublin, November 2015, he pauses between songs and looks at the audience of maybe 200 people. "If this is the end," he says, smiling, "at least it sounds good." Everyone laughs. Nobody realizes he's accidentally prophesying. Were these final years, this quiet life, this small career, this contentment with obscurity, acts of failure or the ultimate artistic success? Can you win by refusing to compete? Can you matter by insisting you don't need to? Cork, January 2016. Colin is working on new material, demos that will eventually be compiled and released posthumously. He's in good spirits. Camilla will later say he seemed happy, or as close to happy as Colin ever allowed himself to be. He's planning shows for spring. There's talk of a small documentary. Life, as much as life ever does, feels stable. January 10th is ordinary. Colin drives to run errands. The N25 is wet. Another driver makes a mistake. Or maybe Colin does, or maybe it's just the chaos of physics and timing. The cars collide. In an instant, the man who spent 53 years trying to understand and articulate human feeling loses consciousness. He's rushed to Cork University Hospital. The injuries are severe, brain trauma, the kind that means even if he wakes, he might not be himself. For 16 days, Camilla sits beside his bed. Friends visit. News spreads through the small community of people who loved his music. Social media fills with prayers and memories, people sharing which Black song meant the most to them, how Colin's voice helped them through depression, breakups, grief. The messages are uniform. His music saved me. I wasn't alone because of him. I learned it was okay to feel sad. On January 26, 2016, the doctors tell Camilla there's no brain activity. The decision is made. The machines are turned off. Colin Vearncombe, who turned sadness into sanctuaries, who proved that gentleness could be radical, who sang quietly so others would lean in and listen, dies without waking. He is 53 years old and his last song will never be finished. The last track he'd been working on has a demo title, "Goodbye, Baby Blue." Nobody knows if it was meant to be about leaving or being left, about death or just departure. The lyrics are fragments, the melody not yet complete. In a way, this feels appropriate. Colin's career was always about the beautiful incomplete, the moments between certainties, the feelings that resist definition. Can anyone ever truly be prepared for silence? Especially someone who spent their life filling it with meaning. Or was Colin Vearncombe always living on borrowed time, too sensitive for the brutality of existence, held together by the discipline of his craft until circumstance pulled that discipline away? The funeral is small, private. Family, close friends, the people who knew Colin not as Black but as himself. The church is stone and old, Irish to its bones. Someone plays Wonderful Life. Camilla weeps quietly. The song echoes off ancient walls and everyone present understands the terrible irony. The anthem of survival outliving the man who wrote it. In the weeks after, tributes pour in from unexpected places. Musicians who were influenced by him, listeners whose lives he touched, critics who belatedly recognize his importance. The internet becomes a memorial. YouTube comments on Wonderful Life transform into eulogy. People sharing where they were when they first heard it, how it helped them survive their own dark nights. Were these final moments, the crash, the coma, the quiet death, acts of cruel randomness or inevitable conclusion for a soul too delicate for sustained existence? Could we have saved him? Should we have driven the roads for him, protected him from the chaos of the world he felt too acutely? But perhaps the question is wrong. Perhaps Colin Vearncombe didn't need saving. Perhaps he lived exactly as long as he could while remaining himself, and when circumstance demanded his end, it came, not as punishment or proof of fragility, but simply as the conclusion to a story that was always about the preciousness of temporary beauty. Today, more than 8 years after his death, Colin Vearncombe exists in that strange space reserved for cult artists, not famous but beloved. Wonderful Life continues to be discovered by new generations. The song soundtracks films about melancholy appears on playlists titled Songs for Sad People, is covered by artists from jazz singers to electronic producers. Each interpretation recognizes what Colin always knew. The song isn't about one man's sadness, but about the universality of feeling both blessed and burdened by existence. His independent albums have found second lives on streaming platforms. Young people who weren't born when Black was famous discover the later work and recognize something they can't find in contemporary music. Sincerity without performance, sadness without self-pity, beauty that doesn't require happiness. In an era of algorithmic recommendations and playlist culture, Colin's catalog becomes a quiet refuge for those overwhelmed by loudness. The impact of his death on those who loved him personally remains visible. Camilla established a small foundation in his name, funding music therapy programs for people dealing with depression and anxiety. It's exactly what Colin would have wanted, not a monument, but a use. Not glory, but help. Tracy Thorn wrote an essay about him in 2017. Colin never sang to be admired, he sang to make you feel safe. In a world obsessed with being seen, he offered the radical gift of being heard, not performing himself, but performing care for the listener, care for the feeling, care for the craft of making sound that heals rather than distracts. Those who saw him live remember the shows with particular tenderness. The way he'd close his eyes while singing, not for effect, but because the emotions required that kind of focus. The way he'd smile apologetically after sad songs, as if sorry for making you feel, but also knowing you needed to feel. The way the small venues, 100 people, a church basement, a pub back room, felt like ceremonies rather than concerts. The documentary that was discussed before his death eventually materialized in 2017. Wonderful Life, the story of Black. It's a tender film, avoiding sensationalism, letting the music and the people who loved him speak for themselves. Camilla participates, her grief visible but contained. He was exactly what he seemed, she says. Kind, quiet, true. He wasn't performing sensitivity, that was just Colin. In the film, they show his home studio, left exactly as it was, equipment still set up, the last recording project still on the computer. Notebooks filled with lyrics that will never become songs. Paintings half finished. The camera lingers on his handwriting and viewers see a line from his journal. Every song I wrote was a letter I never sent, a confession disguised as craft. His influence extends beyond music into broader cultural conversations about mental health, about the value of sadness, about the tyranny of mandatory happiness. In an era when wellness culture demands constant positivity, Colin's legacy is a counter-argument. Sadness is not pathology but part of being human, and denying it causes more damage than accepting it. His music becomes evidence that you can make beautiful things from difficult feelings, that art can honor pain without glorifying it. Universities study his career as a case study in artistic integrity versus commercial success. His decision to leave WEA is taught in music business courses as either the bravest or most foolish choice an artist can make, depending on the professor's values. His independent career is analyzed as proof that sustainable art-making requires rejecting the industry's scale in favor of human scale. But perhaps the most profound impact is the quietest one. The people who discover wonderful life during their own dark nights and hear for the first time someone telling them it's okay to not be okay. The teenagers who find his music and realize they're not alone in feeling too much. The adults who return to his albums during grief or divorce or depression and find companionship in his voice. They never meet him, never will meet him, but they know him. Know the part of him he put into songs, the part that was offering comfort before they even knew they needed it. In his journal, in an entry from 2010, Colin wrote about wonderful life. It wasn't about joy, it was about surviving it. A sentence that sounds contradictory until you understand his philosophy. That joy can be as overwhelming as sadness, that even beautiful moments can be almost too intense to bear. That the challenge of being alive is learning to hold all the feelings without being destroyed by them. The industry itself hasn't changed in response to Colin's life and death. Major labels still pressure artists to repeat successes. The music business still values scale over sustainability. But individual artists cite him as inspiration, proof that you can opt out, that you can choose the small dedicated audience over the mass market, that integrity matters more than reach. When asked what Colin's legacy should be, those who knew him struggle to answer, not from lack of material, but from abundance. Finally, someone says, Colin taught us that gentleness is not weakness, that sadness deserves beauty, that you don't have to be loud to be heard, you just have to be true. Mysteries remain. What would the finished Goodbye Baby Blue have sounded like? What other songs were forming in his mind during those last weeks? Would he have eventually achieved the wider recognition his advocates believe he deserved? Or was he destined to remain a secret shared among those who understand? Those who knew him suspect he would have continued exactly as he was, making albums every few years, playing small shows, living quietly in Ireland, finding contentment in craft rather than fame. The car crash didn't interrupt some grand plan for comeback or reinvention. It simply ended a life that was already complete in its own terms. The photograph from the Wonderful Life video remains iconic. Colin's face in black and white, eyes gentle, expression neither smiling nor sad, but both. It's been shared millions of times across social media, often without context, just the image and the feeling it evokes. People who don't know his name know his face, know that quality of quiet acceptance he embodied. At his grave in Ireland, fans occasionally leave small offerings. Handwritten lyrics, film cameras, prints of clouds and seascapes. Nothing flashy, everything sincere. The tributes match the man. Modest, beautiful, temporary. Rain washes them away eventually, but others replace them. The cycle continues. Art and weather, intention and entropy, the permanent and the passing. Meanwhile, in small apartments and suburban bedrooms around the world, people discover Colin Vearncombe's music and feel that particular recognition. Someone understood. Someone felt this too. Someone made beauty from the heaviness. And in that recognition is the gift he kept giving even after death, the assurance that sadness is not solitude, that feeling deeply is not weakness, that it's okay to move through the world quietly and still leave a mark. A coastal village in Ireland sits peaceful in the grey light. Windows glow with interior warmth. Waves roll onto shore with their ancient rhythm. Somewhere, someone presses play on Wonderful Life and hears a voice that sounds like rain and acceptance. Like someone who knew that survival is its own victory, like a friend whispering, "It's hard, I know, but you're not alone." Colin Vearncombe wasn't perfect. He was reclusive in ways that sometimes hurt those who loved him. He struggled with depression that he managed but never conquered. He made choices that hurt his career and sometimes questioned those choices in the small hours when doubt is loudest. But he was real. Entirely, beautifully, painfully real. And in a world increasingly built on performance, that realness remains radical. "If I could live forever," he once said, "I'd still choose to whisper." He whispered. The world leaned in, Some heard, some didn't. Those who heard will never forget. Not the volume, but the intimacy. Not the spectacle, but the sincerity. Not the fame, but the feeling. When they released his posthumous material in 2016, the album was titled simply Black, Water on Stone. The cover black and white, minimal, a simple design. Inside a short note. Thank you for listening. 4 words. Everything he ever needed to say to those who understood. Thank you for leaning in when the world was shouting. Thank you for valuing whispers. Thank you for understanding that wonderful life is not a promise but an observation. Complex, contradictory, and true. He taught us that sadness is not something to fix but something to feel fully. That beauty can exist in melancholy. That you don't have to be happy to make happy possible for others. That art at its best is not entertainment but witness. Proof that someone else has felt what you feel, survived what you're surviving, and found a way to make something beautiful from it. The question is not whether Colin Vearncombe will be remembered. His music ensures that. The question is whether we'll learn from his example. That success is not measured in sales or fame, but in the integrity of the work. That influence is not about reach, but depth. That the most important conversations happen in whispers between artist and listener, in the small hours when we're most ourselves. That the answer to "was it worth it" can only be measured by whether you stayed true to yourself, not whether the world noticed. That sometimes one honest song matters more than a career of compromises. That lasting doesn't require loudness, only truth. Night over Cork, rain again, a window open, someone listening. When gentleness becomes defiance, does the world listen? Or only after it's too late? And if silence outlives the singer, is it grief? Or proof that quiet truth endures?